Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Before we get started, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button before you leave, that helps out my channel a lot. I also like it when people leave comments, so check out the video, make sure to hit the like button, and leave a comment. Today I'm going to be making a Marquise Cabochon ring that has two accent stones on the side that are square sapphires. The middle stone is an Azurite Malachite. That's a deep, rich blue with a little bit of hints of green on it. I'm going to be creating sort of a semi-bezel for that on the top, and then prong setting the two 4mm square sapphires on the sides in a way that I haven't done before, so I'm kind of excited to try it. Before we get started though, I'd like to thank my YouTube subscribers. We just passed 6,700, which is great and amazing. Without your guys' support and interest in what I'm doing here, this wouldn't be growing and I wouldn't be experiencing success with this. So thank you for all of your support, and thanks for watching my videos. I'm glad you're liking them. So I also wanted to thank my patrons for their support. They're paying for my premium content over on Patreon. They're kind of my bread and butter, and I really appreciate their support as well. It's a growing, really nice community over there. I've met a number of really nice people, and it's kind of fun to interact with them over there. So lots of good knowledge there that I'm getting from them. I hope they're getting as much from me as I'm getting from them. So let's get started on this ring project. Let's take a look at what I drew up for this. This is my design idea book, or one of the three available. I found it to be super handy when coming up with ideas anymore. And having something where I draw up my ideas in advance really improves what I'm producing here, I think. So I've learned a lot this past couple of years, and one of the main things is coming up with a well thought out design in advance helps a lot. It solves some problems. So this is what I'm going to do. Here's the stones that I have. Here's my main stone. It's really, really dark blue here with a little hint of lighter blue in there, and then a little bit of green around the edge. I think it'll be pretty. I'm going to set it with a kind of just a bezel cup with just some kind of sheet prong sort of things on the top there. I have a couple of these little blue sapphires here that are about 4mm each. We're going to put one of those on either side. I got them sitting upside down so they sit flat, but yeah, like that. This band, this was a crude drawing, is going to be more like this, where it's got some border on it, and then we'll cut out a little square just in the size, a little bit smaller than the stone, and then slope the sides a bit downward so it creates kind of a nice setting for it. And we'll mount 4 prongs on each one, and then for the rest of the band, it's going to be 18 gauge sheet. I'm going to solder on probably some 14 gauge round wire here on the side, or maybe 14 gauge square. I haven't quite decided yet. And then file it so that it gradually tapers back into the band and dissipates. And then we'll have those kind of set between there. And this, I'll probably have to curve the ends a little bit to match the outside of the bezel that I'm going to, sort of bezel that I'm going to create for this thing here. And then we'll attach it right there. This thing itself is going to be kind of a low-lying platform with 18 gauge sheet on the bottom to give it some strength, since we're going to be soldering the base of it to this here. And then 26 gauge sheet up here that I'm going to cut out some weird stuff on to make it kind of lay down flat and have some show off more of the stone. Normally I'd be using fine silver bezel strip, but since I'm going to have kind of a cutaway bezel here, I'm going to use 26 gauge sterling instead, which is much harder, and so it'll be a little bit challenging to get that sit down against a stone, but I think we can probably do it. So I think first stage, let's make the bezel cup for this thing. Height-wise, it doesn't have to be super high. And it's going to need to be about twice that long. So we go there, there. Probably if I cut a piece about 2 right there, that should give me plenty with some extra. My high-tech measuring system. 5 millimeters seems about right. So we'll see how that works. That looks reasonably straight. Everybody asks about these shears that I use. They're just Fisker's craft shears. You usually get them at craft stores or one of the big chain it's been my experience to make a sharp bend like this you need to use pliers rather than just wrapping it around the stone. And you're not, if you're making a bezel for, this isn't really a bezel, kind of a bezel, you don't want to end it at the point there because that'll end up being quite different from this one and it may be super hard to set your stone. So we're going to end that side in the middle here. So I'm going to make a bend pretty sharply there. The stone's got a pretty bottom. It's too bad it's Malachite Azurite because I probably set it with an open back, even though it's not polished. I think it needs to come in just a tiny bit. My pliers are starting to squeak. Either that or my hands are starting to squeak. I'm not sure which. If you've never seen my videos before, I use hard sheet solder, which is what I was just cutting, and spray-on flux called My-T-Flux. In hindsight, since I'm going to have a tab here, I probably should have put the solder joint a little bit off to one side. That would have made more sense. But, I don't always think of everything. I think we got it pretty good on the size and everything. All right. So I want to solder this down to 18 gauge, like I said. You want to make sure it's nice and flat. I'm going to use quite a bit of solder for this one since it's a long bezel. One thing that is going to be a little different than usual is normally on these I'm using 26 gauge for the backs of things, which is I guess about a third as thick as this maybe. And so the disparity between the mass of the bezel on top and this big thick sheet on the bottom is pretty big, as well as the bezel being exposed to the heat up top here and the sheet being harder to get up to temperature. And so you have to play with where you're pointing the heat at in order to get that sheet up to temperature before you melt your bezel, which is a common problem if you're kind of a beginner. This is probably not a beginner project, so that's about it. Since we're creating our own prong settings and everything. You mostly want to make sure everything's touching the sides and the bottom. And then if you need to, you can a lot of times you can tip. I'm not going to do it with this skinny piece. You can heat from below like this a little bit. Get things going hot pretty quick from the bottom. Less likely to melt your bezel. Pump some heat into that bottom sheet. be trimming this off once I make sure I got a seam all the way around. Be right back. Alright, so I filed it down and then I colored it on the outside with my little purple Sharpie here. And I decided I'm going to go ahead and use about that height. And so I'm going to use these little calipers to scribe a line all the way around. Same distance from the bottom. Then I'm going to have to kind of figure out where the center is here and decide how far out I want this little tab to go up. Okay, that seems about the right width, so let's go with something about, just make it 10 millimeters, so 5 millimeters to either side. Roughly. I'm going to make an arbitrary choice on that one. That's also about 5 millimeters. Okay, so basically I'll need to remove this part here, this part here, this part here, this part here. And in order to get these to bend over that corner, I'm going to have to cut a notch up here and actually trim out some once I figure out the angle it's going to be at. So I'm going to have to finish that after we get ready to set the stone. I'll do some fine tuning on that. But right now I'm just going to remove this area and this area and this area. Alright, so hopefully you can see what I did here. I just cut these down with the saw, and then I snipped out what I could, and then I just used the Dremel with a diamond burr to smooth those out a little bit. It looks like this one still needs a little more. You can use your file for that too. Like that. And nice and flat. You see I got these split down here. These will probably have to be cut down just a tiny bit shorter, as will these, in order to make them. Well, I'm going to have to angle these out kind of like at that angle in order to bend those down where these two will meet, kind of in the middle here like this. So it'll be interesting. I'll have to do that when we get to that stage. At this point though, I think it's time to cut our band out here and maybe cut our pieces of wire to solder down to it. And then we can mark it out and cut out these little squares and get those ready to go. So I'm going to set this to the side for now along with this. And what I measured for here on this was, this is about an 8.5 wrapped around a piece of paper around the ring mandrel. Okay. Which goes to about an 8.5 right there. And then I deducted the width of this roughly, and it comes to there. So that's going to be our length of our piece. That's going to be the band, because it's going to connect here and here, and so this part of it will actually be incorporated into the length of the band, right? So this long, and I'm going to use 18 gauge, and I still got a factory edge here, it looks like. Let's use that, because that's always nice and straight. This 18 gauge is starting to get a little expensive these days. And I think that's a good width, so I'm going to go about like that. Maybe just a little bit wider. $16.5 millimeters. Let's go 16.5 millimeters down here. So let's start by cutting that piece out. You can saw this if you prefer, just for these bigger ones. Cut them out first, and then I'll use the saw if I need to do any smaller cuts on them. Here's round wire. That would look alright. Let's find some square. I think I like the square better. So I'm going to go with that. Center this and everything and see how far we need to make this taper. You can kind of scribe out the final shape. I think I went in 2 millimeters from the center on each side and then just tapered them in. So let's see how that works. I'm going to go a little bit more. Let's go 3. 1, 2, 3. I cut 4 pieces of that square 14 gauge wire and I laid them out how they're going to be. Before I do that, I'm going to scribe those lines from the corners. And then I think we'll probably solder them on and then we'll trim it down, and then we'll start working on those little holes for the side stones. One of the things I'm concerned about with this particular design is when you solder an edge to something and make it thicker on the edges, it plays with the geometry of the inner part of the sheet here. It's going to warp it a little bit. At least I think it will. It does if I was to solder wire along the edges of both of this, both sides of this thing, and then bend it into a circle, it's going to dome the center a little bit. So I was planning on cutting those squares out after I put those sides on here. So I'm not sure if that's going to affect the geometry of the hole. So this is a little bit of an experiment for me, so we'll have to see. But I can use these as guides for where I want to solder those wires down. And I think probably the best way to solder these down would be to sweat a little bit of solder onto them and then just put them where I want them to go, and then just heat the whole thing till it flows. If you haven't seen me pick solder before, pick soldering is one of those skills that I think takes you to a whole new level. And so if you're new to this, you might check out my video on pick soldering because it's a useful skill and I think it'll improve your overall silversmithing. So we'll see in a sec what I mean by that. I think it allows you to pick up a piece of solder and place it pretty precisely where you want it. I'm just going to flux these. I think if I put a couple of these on each of these wires, it should be enough to wick along the whole bottom of it when I set it on the sheet. Guess we'll find out. But I want to get it to puddle nicely, so I can kind of get it to sit down on the sheet where I want it to be without it wobbling a lot. Alright. This may move those a little bit when I dribble this, but we'll see. Try to do this without getting a lot of movement out of it, so I don't have to push things back into place. it's at that kind of gooey stage, you can sometimes keep it kind of molten, the flux anyway, and push it around and it kind of holds it in place. So now I'm going to heat this whole thing till they flow. The thing to make sure is that that sheet has a lot more mass than these wires, so I really want to make sure that sheet gets hot enough for it to stick to it. And then nothing starts jumping around on me into weird places. I think my next step is going to be to cut off this outside edge here, and then I'm going to Dremel and maybe file a little bit, but Dremel it so it tapers down from thickest up here right down into the sheet there. So that'll be my next step. A little bit of filing and smoothing out with the Dremel. Okay, so now we need to do some calculating here, because I want these guys to be in just a little bit from the edge. Since I may have to curve this a little bit in order to match the side of this bezel. In fact, I will have to curve it just a little bit. I want to make sure I don't have the prong too close. And so when I look at these, I think 3 millimeters in, roughly. So let's go, actually let's find the center of the width first here. So that would make it easier to line these up in the center, I think. It's about 12, so we're right in the middle of that. I think, you know what, I think we need to do the purple thing. Make it easier to see the lines we scribed. Okay, now let's go in 3 millimeters. Now these stones are about 4 millimeters. So I think I'm just a tiny bit wide, so I'll cut it on the inside of the line here. So I'm going to saw out, this is going to be the outer edge right here, and this one I got to remember a little bit on the inside. So I'm going to cut a line a little bit inside of there, cut out a square, and then I'm going to use the diamond burr to grind it to a slope, so that the pavilion of the stone, which is shaped like stones on the bottom, look like this. Basically. So this is going to rest right here, and this point will go down at this. We're going to slope the side so that it sits down in there nice. The side's on the inside of the sheet there. So first we got to drill some little holes and then get the saw going and saw these out. So let's put these back in here. It's kind of my messy sawing area, but I'm going to go ahead and try and drill these. I put a little center punch right there and right there, and I just kind of clamped it down here. Maybe someday when I hit 100,000 subscribers, I'll be able to afford some of those nice magnifying things that dentists use. Okay, so I'm going to now put in one of these little diamond burrs. These are super handy. They're like 14 bucks on Amazon, I think. These are a little bit smaller collet. So I have to swap that out. And then I usually pick one of these ones that's kind of tapered like this. Seat it pretty deep so it doesn't vibrate a lot. And then once we go back, we can check. I'll do the other one, and then we'll check and see how close they are. But you should be able to kind of see that it's angled like that. I'll clean this up too, so it's square from the bottom as well. So. Okay, so I don't know if you can see well this, but we've got kind of a slope downwards on each of these, about 45 degrees. I used the file here to kind of like straighten everything up because those diamond bits kind of leave things a little rough. So get those all kind of squared away. So that's great, they sit in there nicely, but the thing is we need to figure out some way to hold them in place. And to do that we're going to have to build 4 prongs, one on each side of these, I think is the best bet. And to do that, we're going to take some 18 gauge wire, solder it into a plus sign, and then bend it over into this shape. So we got 4 projecting things going straight down, and we're going to solder those right onto the edges of those holes. So that'll be our next step. Okay, so for both of these, those are 4mm stones. So, my regular, there they are. So I'm going to bend these pretty close in like this. And then I'm going to cut those off all the same length. So hopefully you can see this. I cut it shorter, and then I spent a little time getting these prongs just the right distance apart so that they'll sit right on the very edge of the top of that hole that we made in the center of each side. At least as good as I can do with my old eyes. So then it should be able to solder it right down like that. I think, however, I want to go ahead and do the solder the bezel to the band and get it all in the shape it's going to be before I solder these on, because I don't know how this is going to distort things. And if I have to do other solder joints, I don't want these moving around. I want these to be the last ones that I do, I think. So I think I'm going to set those to the side for the moment. And I'm going to cut these off at an angle like that. Leave a little bit to work with there. And then I think we're going to have to get this round around the ring mandrel. Because it's thin here and thicker up here, it's going to try and bend only there. So we're going to have to do a little bit of kind of hand forging on this here to get it to bend right there a little bit. So I did a little bit more pounding and bending and stuff. It's pretty hard to bend up here, so just know that that'll be a little bit of work to get that part curved nicely. So now what I need to do is I need to get the curve on the edge of this here to match nicely up to this. So I'm going to have to probably use one of those abrasive white wheels on the Dremel to kind of carve it. I think let's get this shaped with the Dremel and I'll be right back. So I've got these kind of Dremeled down to where they're pretty good, I think. Tried to center it as best I can, and you want to get it to where it lines up flush along the bottom of there. It's pretty close. So I think I'm going to push this into a magnesia block in order to try and keep this sort of everything in the right place. I don't think that moved too much, so let's give that a go. I'm going to place some solder on the inside of there. I'm going to try and get it to heat pretty evenly, and then we'll see how it goes. I'm going to use quite a bit of solder. Let's see if we can't get these soldered into one piece. Alright, get up there. The piece up top, even though it's probably a little bit more massive, is a little more exposed to the flame. And so I'm going to have to kind of focus on the bottom piece, which is sort of buried in this magnesia block, which kind of protects it a little bit from the heat. But I want them both to reach 1450 degrees-ish. Somebody looked up what that is in centigrade or Celsius the other day, and I don't remember what it was. Got that on there pretty straight. Looks like a solid solder joint. Now comes the fun part. Try to get these little cages in the right spot. That one looks pretty good. Okay, so that is pretty much what I need to do as far as soldering. We just need to pickle it now and set the stones. I'll be cutting these cages off after I pickle it for a while, and I'll be dremeling those on the inside to be about half as thick and flat on the inside, and then I'm going to use those as prongs that go over those little squares. So I'll do some of that on camera too, but let's let this pickle for a while. I apologize if I have polishing hair. I have trimmed off the tops of those things, and I narrowed these prongs just slightly by using the Dremel to flatten them out on the inside. And then I stuck this stone in here, and it's looking like it's fitting pretty good. I'm going to grab the top of this prong and pull it this way a little bit. Top of this one, pull it this way a little bit. So it can't move anymore. And then we'll try doing these ones a little bit. I was a little afraid of catching one of these on the wheel and breaking it off, but I did not do that, so I'm pleased with that. Okay, so I'm going to cut these off right around the middle of the girdle facets. Right about like that. Actually, I'm going to cut them off a little bit on the top here, and then cut them down to the actual length. That way they don't run into each other so much when you're starting to lay them down. I don't want to leave a huge amount of prong there, otherwise you won't be able to see the stone. So like I said, about halfway up the girdle facets is usually what I do. And then once I'm done, I'll use one of those fine polishing wheels on the Dremel to round those out a little bit. That's a little better. Just trying to press that down as tight as I can there. Alright, well. Alright, that's kind of a cool ring. I like it. I'll get it all cleaned up and get some better pictures of it. And like I said, that's the first time I've ever done sapphires or little accent stones that are prong set like that, so that was kind of a fun thing to try. I'm not super pleased with this, and I may modify the design because I don't love the ends of those, but nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? Just make sure everything's tight down and we'll call it a day. Well, that was the elongated Marquis with the accent stones on the side. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you leave. I'd love to hear your comments, suggestions, constructive criticism. That kind of stuff all helps me to make the channel better, and I appreciate it. So feel free to leave a comment. If you're interested in supporting the channel or seeing some other relevant links to my channel, check out the video description down below. There's a link to my website, my merch site, where you can get that nice design idea notebook if you want. There's also a link to buy me a coffee if you just want to give me a little financial support to help buy materials and such. And there's a link to my Patreon if you want to check that out, where you can get some a little more in-depth stuff. So thanks for watching. Happy silversmithing. Take care.